So, hopefully you can all see me. Thank you very much, Kevin, for the wonderful introduction, and it's great to be here. And now, you might be wondering why I'm on a space station, but in modern times, you can't be a futurist organization if you don't actually have your organization incorporated in space. So, as part of the Asgardia community, I thought it'd be a little bit of fun just to actually see if I can incorporate the 311 Institute in space. And it turns out you can. That's it. So I am now registered on Earth and in space. You've got to try new things. Now, as Kevin said, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. Now, I look at two kinds of futures. I look at what I regard as the future, which is the next 20 years, because the vast majority of organizations, the multinationals, the companies that you invest in, and so on and so forth, basically will be looking at the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. I also work up to 50 years out because I work with all G20 governments on the future of energy, infrastructure, the welfare state, education, jobs and skills, transportation, health, and so on and so forth. Now, when we start having a look at the future, every single industry is being impacted by it. Every single industry is being subjected to huge levels of industry as well as societal level change, which is increasingly impacting everything that you do. Now, I work with organizations that have around $60 trillion worth under asset. I work with both the IFA, I work with the Society of Pension Professionals, as well as the UK pensions regulators, as well as many other sort of extended organizations, basically, that all of you know and no doubt love. Now, I thought I would call this presentation by this name. So, the fascinatingly unpredictable, predictable, sci-fi-less future. And the reason why I actually used this title for this presentation will become clear soon. Now, when we start having a look at all of the things that we are being subjected to, whether it is massive technological change or whether it is massive trend level change, things like climate change, things like net zero, things like sustainability, ESG, future of work, workforce, and all these kinds of other things, increasingly, basically, we are seeing that the future is being done to people and being done to organizations that you care about and invest in. Now, trying to put this into perspective, these codexes contain details of over 200 megatrends that are impacting you already, but also over 300 exponential technologies. Because when we talk about technology, we're not just talking about straightforward artificial intelligence. We're talking about how you combine all these different trends and technologies together to create products and sectors of the future. So to try to demonstrate the level of change that we are being subjected to, the boards of organizations like Samsung, PepsiCo, Arm, etc., that I work with are increasingly subjected to this. So when we have a look at the different trends and technologies that we are being directly and indirectly being impacted by, artificial intelligence was up on that screen for a quarter of a millisecond. Climate change was a quarter of a millisecond. So we increasingly live in this kind of complex future, basically, where increasingly the old rules do not apply, whether it is in your professional life, your personal life, whether it is related to the sectors that you actually work in or invest in. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is almost unlearn everything that you already know, because we're going to show you why the things that you already know, the things that you've learned throughout your careers over the past 10, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years are increasingly being unraveled. Now, when we have a look at the future, we increasingly live in this increasingly fast-paced world. You know, if we move back 10 years ago, we've all seen that the rate of change has accelerated to where we are today. And when I ask audiences, do they think that we're going to be moving faster or slower culturally, from a business perspective, from a societal perspective in 2030, 97, 98% of people think we're going to be living in a faster world in 2030. Now, from an organizational perspective, what this means is that if you have a 10-year strategy today, really that strategy, because everything is accelerating, is actually a 5 or 7 year strategy when we come to implementing it in the real world. So we increasingly, as business professionals, have less time to predict the future, plan the future, and adapt to the future. And that's an increasing challenge for boards around the world. The future is also increasingly complex. You know, when we have a look at all the trends and technologies that are changing what we do, how we do it, the markets that we actually serve and service, increasingly it's very difficult to get our head around just the sheer level of change. But while there is a huge amount of threat out there in the world, a huge amount of risk, there is also a huge amount of opportunity. And that's where I would actually encourage you to focus. Now, when we have a look at today's world, I kind of come back to this. Are we in the most complex business environment that has ever existed? We have supply chain issues, massive inflationary pressures, price increases, cost of living crises. We increasingly basically have a tense geopolitical situation, depending on the sort of part of the world that you're actually living in. Basically, we have huge levels of disruption. We have war, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, if this is indeed the most complex business environment, then this year, I don't know if you saw it, the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year, because crisis isn't enough, is permacrisis. So we are now estimated to be living in what the Oxford Dictionary terms permacrisis, which means that we are going from one crisis to another and we are living in permanent crisis, which isn't good for anybody, let's face it. But while that creates a lot of risk from an investor's perspective, it also creates a lot of opportunity, but you know, we'll see what we can do there. Now, when we have a look at the CEO office, for example, CEOs today, it's estimated, only directly influence and affect 45% of the things that affect their organization, which means that over half of the things that are impacting how you work, where you work, the things that you do, how your organization goes about its daily business and enters into new markets while exiting maybe old markets, is actually affected by external factors. We saw this, for example, with strategic dislocation. You know, as we start seeing the rise of China, as we start seeing trade wars, for example, a lot of organizations have had to unwind from Russia, from China, and so on and so forth. So this alone means that there is increased pressure on the CEO office. Now, when we have a look at Jamie Dimon, when we have a look at Jeff Bezos, and when we have a look at Elon Musk and Bill Gates, as he was, in 2019, the New York Business Council, which is a council of the top Fortune 250 organizations on the planet, 186 CEOs of the Fortune 250 decided to end their focus on the shareholder primacy rule. Now, as you might know, the shareholder primacy rule was put together in the 1990s, and it's kind of the rule basically that says that organizations have to put shareholders first. Now, as we see huge amounts of change, as organizations have to invest for the longer term because the market over here is much bigger than the market over here from a temporal perspective, increasingly organizations around the world are taking the longer term view. They're investing for the longer term over the short term. And we see that all over the place. And then we can have conversations about that. But similarly, basically, this sheer level of change means that organizations today have to be both resilient, because they have to have the internal people, processes, and technologies that let them weather different shocks as they come through. But because we see so many different system level shocks, or even regional shocks, they also have to be flexible. And this is kind of counterintuitive, because if you are resilient, then you generally try to lock yourself into one way of doing things, a standard set of processes and functions and so on and so forth. But if you're flexible, you need to actually be able to take those apart very, very quickly and suddenly pivot. So this is one of the biggest things that boards around the world that I work with are actually trying to grapple with. How do you build a resilient organization, people, process, technology, while also being able to pivot on a dime for whatever reason? Now, when we have a look at organizations like ARK Investment, love them or loathe them, they estimate that emerging technology will destroy over $50 trillion worth of GDP. We've seen this with things like the move to renewable energy, where organizations like Aramco, ADNOC, who I was with yesterday, increasingly their oil-based businesses are now starting to lose value. So we see massive wealth destruction in that particular part of the business. And we see other industries going the same way as well. But also, emerging technology is unlocking, it's estimated, up to $210 trillion worth of new value. Now, when we have a look at technologies itself, this is my starburst. So we often talk in terms of a few exponential technologies: 3D printing, 5G, blockchain, virtual reality and augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. Gene sequencing, which is a lot more important than you might think for a variety of reasons. But I track over 650 technologies. You can download them in the codexes at the start. When you start combining all of these different technologies together, that's when you get your new product or service. So, for example, if we have a look at 3D printing fundamentally disrupts the $10 trillion manufacturing industry, and it's starting to accelerate. When we have a look at things like bioprinting, it gives us the ability to do new things that help extend human longevity. When we have a look at the future of compute, we talk about quantum computers, which are billions of times faster than today's best supercomputers, but we're already moving to neuromorphic computers, biological and DNA-based computers that, as per the University of Manchester, have managed to deduce a DNA-based computer which already exists will be the most powerful computer in the known universe, because it can replicate itself up to do 1 billion calculations all at once and collapse itself back down, and you can fit it in a test tube. When we have a look at DNA storage, we've already managed to prove that we can store 0.5 exabytes worth of information in just a single gram of DNA. We also have polymer-based computers and liquid computers and chemical computers that have already been prototyped. Now, when we have a look at things like the communications sector, we have 5G coming through, 6G coming through already. We have quantum communications. We have low Earth orbit space satellites in orbit now, which connect the other 3.5 billion people on the planet. And the only thing that does, if you are Disney or Netflix, is double your total addressable market opportunity, let alone the other industries that we see. When we start talking about things like intelligence, we have artificial intelligence, which is generally narrow today, moving to artificial general intelligence and super intelligence by about 2045. But if you think that you know technology and the future of AI, we have already managed to 3D print artificial intelligences. We've also managed to use DNA to create highly advanced, multi-node artificial intelligences out of DNA that have been able to calculate different things. So when you talk about, do you know basically what the future of technology actually looks like, could look like, what it will do to different investments as well as your personal and professional lives, there is a huge amount of opportunity coming through. And then we look at materials, then we have a look at robotics, and so on and so on and so forth. Neural interfaces are already here. And so we sort of go around this wheel, and you take these different technologies, you combine them together, and that creates your next generation smartphone, next generation car, next generation product or service. But all of these technologies are increasingly powerful, and increasingly they are all available via the wire. Now, when we have a look at agriculture, agriculture accounts for 70% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, and well, actually 20% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, and 70% of all water use. If I stand up a vertical farm in the middle of the Sahel Desert, firstly, I can extract water from the air. So this vertical farm can grow 8 times the crops using 100% less potable water, 100% less chemicals and pesticides. It can be based on renewable energy, so it has a carbon negative footprint, especially if we pump carbon dioxide into the virtual farm, the virtual farm. When we actually have a look at being able to guarantee crops, it's indoors. So today, 40% of all crops are actually lost because of extreme weather. When we actually have a look at other things that are happening in the agricultural sector, they are similarly sci-fi-like. When we have a look at the energy sector, we are moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It's estimated by Bloomberg Neft that by 2050, this is a $92 trillion energy shift. When we have a look at finance, we have traditional banks and financial organizations and financial services organizations. We have fintechs, which are essentially banks and financial services organizations with fancy interfaces, where organizations like Revolut, for example, are increasingly becoming a super app, where Starling Bank is no longer a bank, they are a technology platform that allows you to write banking services on the top of them. So they are bank in a box, but technology platform in a box. When we have a look at decentralized finance, open source finance, there's a lot of change there. Robo-wealth advisors are increasingly prevalent basically throughout the world, quantitative traders. But also when we have a look at the future of work, in Hong Kong as well as Wall Street, we have hedge funds, including organizations like Bridgewater Associates, with $160 billion under asset, that are increasingly becoming autonomous organizations. No people, no human involvement. When we start having a look at healthcare, I'll unpack this a little bit, but there are huge numbers of opportunities in healthcare. By 2028, it's estimated in the healthcare arena that we will reach something called escape velocity, where new medical breakthroughs will be able to extend people's lives by more than a year for every year that we live. And then when we have a look at transportation, everything's changing here. We're taking the operators out of every vehicle, whether it's a cargo ship, an aircraft, a car, a semi-truck, and then we're switching them to alternative fuels, whether it's hydrogen, ammonia, whether it is sustainable aviation fuels, whether it's lithium-ion batteries, and so on and so forth. So every industry is being disrupted from the inside out, and no industry is immune. Now, when we have a look at the drivers of this change, increasingly we have huge economic drivers. We are entering somewhat of a recession. We have a huge cost of living crisis, huge inflationary pressures. When we have a look at the environmental credentials, we have climate change. We have sea level rise that's between 5 to 8 millimeters per year. When we have a look at 2040, this puts 54 megacities potentially underwater and displaces 1 billion people, but also destroys your property portfolio if you're organizations like M&G. We have militarial shifts. A lot of organizations don't talk about the military shifts, but as we move to a bipolar world, a shift in military power is always inevitable. And we're actually seeing military tensions around the world increase, which obviously affects investments. Political, when we move from a hegemony, what the US says, everyone typically jumps, to a bipolar world and a multipolar world, then we have the system level shift that we see affects everything. Now, when we have a look at the political landscape as well, for example, China has seen the benefit that technology has given to the United States. So increasingly, they want to own the technology standards. So we are already starting to see the bifurcation of technology standards in artificial intelligence, 5G, quantum computing, even energy with ultra-high voltage cable systems. So increasingly, China wants to dominate future technology standards, which creates a problem from an interoperability perspective. Societal, basically, we've been through a giant pandemic. 1 in 6 people actually now have a mental health issue, it's estimated, but there's obviously been a massive drive online. And then when we have a look at technological shifts, there are innumerable number of technological shifts which are actually changing what we make, how we consume it, the markets that we can or can't operate in, and so on and so forth. Now, from an Abrdn perspective, this means basically that all of these actually affect every single vector that you have. From the institutional vector, this means that you have an increasingly complex investor environment. It's increasingly fast-moving, high risk, high reward, if you can get that right. We have massive value creation, but also massive value destruction. We have the rise of protectionism versus globalism because of recent trade wars and because of the geopolitical situations. We have regulation confusion. Now, I mean this in 2 ways. Firstly, when we have a look at increasingly polarized governments, for example, in the US, the Democrats will increasingly put in these kinds of regulations. When the Republicans get in, they reverse everything. So we have regulation confusion basically from an organization's perspective. If you're the CEO of an organization, you don't know what the regulations might look like next year or even maybe next month. But also, a lot of the regulators that I actually work with, when we start having a look at these near, mid and deep term futures, they just don't understand basically how to regulate some of the new things that we are doing, such as fully autonomous electricity grids with Ofgem and so on and so forth. So regulators are increasingly feeling gridlocked by all the technological changes. We still haven't got our heads around artificial intelligence regulation, crypto regulation, and so on and so forth. And then from an investor perspective, because the future is so different to what it has been in the past, this kind of backcasting that we all do, we have massive data vacuums. We saw that with the quantitative traders where there was no data available on what happens in a pandemic, so the quantitative traders basically went haywire. We also have alpha erosion. So when we have conversations with organizations like BlackRock, everyone piles into ESG investing, but because everyone piles into ESG investing and similar sort of portfolios, the returns on those portfolios are starting to be suppressed, which is why we then have a look for alt data and alt investment opportunities, basically to pump those alpha values back up. When we have a look at the intermediary vector, we have impact investing, we have new competitors coming in all the time because increasingly technology lets us do new things in new ways and decentralize even the most centralized of industries. We have shifting regulations again. We have activism both at the shareholder level but also at the societal level. We've seen that actually with COP27 as well as with FIFA in Qatar, where, for example, with BrewDog are now coming across as the anti-sponsor. Yeah, and so on and so on and so forth. We have human longevity. We are increasingly getting to the point where 100 could be the new 60. So when we have a look at the impact on annuities and pension plans, the organizations that I sit down with, basically, this is a Titanic level change, basically on how they actually calculate their premiums. When we have a look at regulatory vacuums, increasingly, as I say, regulators aren't really sure how to regulate that new thing that entrepreneur has just made. And then when we have a look at the individual vector, we're seeing a lot of different changes here as well. We're seeing the cost of living affecting people's ability to invest. We're seeing increased debt burdens, whether it's at the educational level or the personal level. We're seeing a $50 trillion wealth transfer basically from baby boomers to other generations over about the next 10 years. We see women on the rise. So from an investment perspective, this represents a $30 trillion investment opportunity. But we also have the democratization of Wall Street, which is a little bit of a misnomer because you'll have access to data that the common person won't. So even though we use platforms basically like Robinhood and everything else, it's not the same as those big Bloomberg terminals, for example. But nevertheless, organizations like Revolut literally are trying to democratize Wall Street. So we see this with decentralized finance, we see this with social trading and so on and so forth. The future is work, and the future of work is also changing basically what we invest in and how we invest, and also the periods that we invest for. It's estimated that at the Gen X level, most Gen Xers will have up to 8 jobs throughout their lifetime, and that's if they aren't automated. And in fact, most Gen Xers believe that they're actually going to be running multiple jobs at the same time. 36% of them are already working in the gig economy and working multiple jobs. Then when we have a look at human longevity, this affects basically how we invest. Because if I'm going to live to the age of 120, what do I do with my portfolio, my investments, basically my wealth transfer? What happens basically as a rich individual basically when I start coming to wealth planning and wealth management? What do I pass down to who? And so on and so forth. So there's lots of change. But the breadth of change is substantial in itself. We have the digital death of boundaries. So consider this. When you have a conversation with a bank will say, we are in the industry or in the business of providing savings, loans, mortgages, wealth advice, whatever it happens to be. A car company will say, we are in the business of making and selling cars. You're going to have the same conversation with a technology organization like Alibaba, Baidu, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on and so forth. And they will say, we're in every industry. Because once you're a digital organization, from top to bottom, from front to back, it means that you can spot a new opportunity in an adjacent market or in an adjacent sector and move into it faster than ever before, increasingly to dominate it. So we see technology convergence, we see sector level convergence as well. We see new asset classes, but also we see the end of sectors. So I sit down regularly with the likes of KPMG, and if we have a look at the automotive sector, for example, if you look after the automotive sector, what do you do with an organization basically like Neo that is essentially a super app that is now selling connected home products, food, lifestyle products, let alone everything else? When we have a look at organizations basically in the telco sector, if you look after the telco sector, what do you do with an organization like Vodafone or MTN in Africa, who increasingly are providing financial services as well? Are they a telco or are they a bank? So this is where we see the breakdown of the concept that we see as sectors. Now, when we have a look at the economies, we often talk in terms of the physical economy and the digital economy. But we also have the rise of the virtual economy, which is estimated to be between $8 to $13 trillion worth of value, depending who you believe. But the digital economy is not the same as a virtual economy. And when we actually have a look at the virtual economy, which is kind of the metaverse, and that's a conversation in itself, the old rules for achieving trust in assets, data, brand experience, transactions, and so on and so forth does not apply. So we have an entire emerging economy that has completely new rules. So a little while ago, basically to highlight this, I sat down with the CEO of Adidas. And this was when Christine Lagarde basically said digital assets have fundamentally no value. At which point basically said, we've just sold $25 million worth of virtual sneakers, and they'd done that in 3 hours. I don't think digital assets are worthless. So this kind of gets us into this weird space where when we talk about digital assets, they may not actually be tied to any store of value. However, the way that we perceive value as a society can often drive the value of those things up, which then means that there's opportunity for value creation. But all of a sudden, if we switch and we suddenly decide there is no value basically in those particular things over there, those NFT pieces of art that we see, all of a sudden, their value declines very rapidly. When we have a look at Coca-Cola, another one of my customers, they have created virtual Coca-Cola. You buy it in Roblox for money, Roblox coins. You drink it in the metaverse. It gives your character an energy boost. And then Coca-Cola gives you a QR code to go and get the physical product from a local store. So this is where we talk about digital products. Organizations like Bulgari and LVMH are doing this as well. You buy your Gucci handbag and you get the virtual one along with it. You buy the physical piece of jewelry, a serpentini in Bulgari's case, and you get the virtual piece of immersive NFT artwork that goes along with it. Even Diageo. Diageo recently sold a rare whiskey, a set of rare whiskies, along with a $35,000 NFT. Now, Diageo could have sold this as a ticket in the past. However, they sold out. And so from a brand perspective, when we start having a look at new rules versus old rules, this is something that Diageo could not really have done easily basically in the past. But from their perspective, it pumped up their earnings. When we have a look at the token economy, it's estimated by organizations like BCG, ADDX, Citi, that the token economy will be bigger than the global economy. And the reason for this is because I can tokenize anything. I can tokenize a physical asset, a digital asset, a virtual asset, or thing. Now, when we start having a look at the value, at the conversation between the future of money and value, when we have a look at tokenization and Web3, in the world of Nike as well as others, I no longer need to buy my actual goods with money, with the US dollar, with the euro, with sterling, with Bitcoin. I can buy products with my moves. I can earn money in games because I move around in games or spend time in games. With IKEA, IKEA actually lets you pay for goods in store in the Middle East with time. So when we start having a look at payments, payments is changing. I was having these conversations with Visa the other day, basically down in South Africa and as well as over in Europe. So when we start talking about the future payment landscape, which is a $17 trillion industry / market in itself, there are a whole variety of new things coming. But when we actually have a look at things like money, we can buy houses in America now basically with a Bitcoin mortgage. But it doesn't have to be Bitcoin. I could buy a house with rocks and stones, provided whoever I'm transacting with sees value in whatever it is that I'm offering. So when we actually have a look at the future of money itself, the US dollar, CBDCs, basically the yuan, the euro, and so on and so forth, in a decentralized finance world, if I decide that we want to trade basically together basically in stones, and you can trade in stones as well with other people in your community, do we ever need the US dollar? Do I ever need to cash out my tokenized whatever it happens to be? So when you have a conversation with finance ministers around the world and say the fiat currencies that they support might be less relevant in the future, they find this very difficult basically to argue against. And when we have a look at decentralized finance, this is a wonderful world in itself. When we have a look at digital humans extend the human experience at internet scale. They put millions of people out of jobs. Big conversation in itself. But we see Mercedes, digital humans, selling cars. We see NatWest selling mortgages and loan advice and travel advice and account advice, basically using digital humans. Digital humans are authentic, lifelike digital replicas of humans, basically, that are able to use conversational artificial intelligence and neural network brains to talk to you in the similar way that I'm talking at you, admittedly. When we have a look at this kind of world of science fiction, we have cars, basically like these Audis, for example, that drive themselves home. But how much do you actually know about the future of the car business? I put that to 1,000 dealers in Finland the other week, and they all thought they knew the future of transportation and mobility. But what happens when your self-driving car, which is essentially a giant supercomputer packed with GPU on wheels, mines cryptocurrency? Your car is no longer a depreciating asset. Companies like Daymac are actually offering this now. Would you like the car that's sitting on your driveway to be making you money, basically, so that when you get home, it just says, by the way, here's a ton of money I made you while you were doing your own job? But more than that, when we actually have a look at the future of vehicles, organizations like Lightyear One, Toyota, Hyundai, BMW, as we already start switching basically from lithium-ion based battery cars to solar vehicles. If you have a car that has solar panels and flexible PV materials that cover its surface, they generate their own electricity. So they're an energy generator. Now, because we have advances in wireless energy technologies, This car here can generate its own electricity and then transmit it to the car behind, like charging your phone wirelessly. In which case, organizations like Toyota become an energy generator and an energy distributor. It's a new business opportunity for them. So that's a whole conversation in itself. When we have a look at companies like Adidas, they are 3D printing shoes in the back of stores. Now, on the one hand, this is on-demand fashion, but on the other hand, it means that Adidas no longer have to have the factory in China making 100 million shoes. They no longer have to ship 100 million shoes. They no longer have to hold inventory of 100 million shoes, because you just choose the one you want, it prints it out on the back. But they can also personalize those shoes, which means that they increase their profits by 65% while eliminating their inventory and most of their supply chains. So just this single slide obliterates a lot of Adidas's supply chains, as well as others. When we have a look at organizations like KFC, so Future of Agriculture, AgTech 2, we can take the cell from an animal, like a chicken, put it into a bioreactor, which is like an advanced manufacturing technology, and we can grow chicken nuggets. So we can produce chicken without the animal. And we can do that with any meat. We can do it with zebra, with panda, with cow. So we could have zebra burgers, for example. In Singapore, as well as in the US, we're already selling lab-made meat for $8 a pound. 7 to 8 years ago, it was $1 million a pound. But it's completely sustainable and it eliminates cattle where we are deforesting the Amazon rainforest because of our thirst for burgers. We can also 3D print organs in the lab. In Israel, they 3D printed a working, functional human heart that's this big. By 2030, they estimate it will be full human size. But even at the NHS, basically, we are already 3D printing a variety of different human bits and bobs, whether it's bone, cartilage, corneas, whether it's livers, parts of brains, all kinds of different things. So this technology alone means that we see the end of organ transplantation. However, we also see new modes of future of work. Because if I need a new heart, because I've had a heart attack, then using 5G and advanced robotic technologies, basically like the Da Vinci machines, increasingly I can be here in London, but my surgeon can be over in Mumbai. And they can operate on me while they are thousands of miles away. And we've done this with neurosurgery and heart surgery. So your surgeon no longer needs to be wherever you, the patient, are. So we are decentralizing primary healthcare services at global scale using new technologies. We've often talked about the ability to sequence people's genomes almost in real time. In the US, we've now managed to sequence an entire human genome in under 5 hours. This has huge ramifications basically for personalized medicine, as well as basically how we create drugs and different things. So this opens up a whole new frontier of personal medicine. But again, step back 20 years ago, this would have taken $1 billion and it would have taken about 10 years. So technology is accelerating everything, and the benefits that it brings are staggering. We're also using this kind of technology to sequence people's genomes as well as cancers to create personalized cancer vaccines that increasingly have been shown to be 100% effective. And it does depend on the cancer that we're targeting. That's it, particularly things like bowel cancer, pancreatic cancer. But increasingly, this one slide does a whole variety of new things. So for example, when we have a look at gene editing, when you take technologies like CRISPR, 2 years ago, we managed to put someone with Hunter's syndrome. And Hunter's syndrome is an inherited genetic condition. And there are two pieces of news. The good news is you die in 20 years. The bad news is you die in 20 years really painfully if you have it. So we put patient X basically into a bed, put him onto an intravenous drip, gave him a cup of tea. Half an hour later, we let him go. Now, in the IV, basically, was a CRISPR genetic engineering tool that clipped out the bad genes and then clipped in the good genes. He no longer has Hunter's syndrome. Now, that live in vivo genetic re-engineering has been done multiple times since to cure blindness, but it also helps us cure 600 incurable genetic conditions. It also helps us create new cancer therapies and designer humans. So when we have a look at the future of healthcare, there's a huge amount to unpack. But when we talk about this speed of change, because seeing all this is fine, but if it's far away, we can adapt to it, we can plan for it, we can understand it. But when we have a look at the speed of change, as an individual here, it is cheaper than ever before for me to start a business. I have almost real-time access to capital, whether it's crowdfunding or investors or different communities. Almost real-time access to expertise. If I want to have a conversation with the world's top artificial intelligence expert like Andrew Ng, if he replies to me, I can have that conversation with him. We have unparalleled access to resources, which means that the ability for I as an entrepreneur who has a good idea to create a product and at least have something that I can sell is now infinitely better than it was even 10 to 20 years ago. So the power for me to be an entrepreneur with an idea and to bring that idea to life is now better than ever before. But from an execution perspective, if my idea is digital, even if it isn't, provided I can execute, I can take that single product, put it into the ether, and I can scale it to billions of people very, very quickly. So this is where we see massive value creation, but also faster value destruction. Because as an entrepreneur, if I had an idea in the past and I wanted to scale it if I wanted to create it, let alone scale it to 1 billion people, it would have been a Herculean task. It's easier now, which is why we see so many unicorns popping up all over the place. Just one of the reasons. But when we have a look at the global financial services sector, we are already at the point where we can disrupt individual sectors within the space of one day. So think of that as a speed of change. A prime example of this would have been Facebook's Libra cryptocurrency. Released in June 2019, had the regulators trusted Facebook and approved its use, to quote the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, as well as the US Fed, this would have changed the global financial system as well as the state's control of money, because it was a basket of fiat currencies, overnight. Now, the reason for this is because when we talk about being able to scale and execute at speed, Mark Zuckerberg could have released his cryptocurrency at 9 o'clock in the morning. If he'd been able to execute really well, he could have had 2 billion people using it by the end of the day. Even if he'd actually executed fairly poorly, he could have still have had 100, 2, 3, 4, 500 million people using it by lunchtime. So when we talk about this as being the pace of change, this is what makes basically the environment that we're in so complex basically to actually understand, because today we have one status quo, but tomorrow we could actually suddenly see a whole new set of customer behaviors, products, and so on and so forth basically emerging. But when we talk about product innovation itself, this is accelerating as well. So for example, we now have artificial intelligences that are able to iterate new products. But they do it at digital speed. They do it in simulation. Now, what we mean by this is you give an artificial intelligence an instruction. You give it access to data and data sets. And the artificial intelligence, provided it can understand the context and what you want it to do, will then go about creating either new products or iterating older products. But again, this is a convergence of multiple technologies, whether it's generative artificial intelligence with increasing computer power, simulations and virtual reality environments and digital twin environments, but also things like materials and advanced manufacturing, because we can then 3D print those things off. So for example, recently we saw Google DeepMind, in the space of just a couple of months, not only manage to simulate one protein, but simulate every single protein on the planet. That unlocks a huge amount of opportunity, both in biomanufacturing, but also healthcare and other sectors. But more than that, it used to take Toyota 2 years, so 2 years, to create a new electric vehicle battery. Using a creative artificial intelligence, they made a brand new next generation electric vehicle battery, so it's a lithium-ion battery, and tested it in 16 days. So when we talk about the pace of change of being able to execute, that's one thing, but the pace of change when it comes to product development is also accelerating as well. We've seen Google use artificial intelligence to create new artificial intelligence computer chips. General Motors using creative artificial intelligence to produce new cars. Amazon is using AI to create new fashion lines. We're seeing content being created by artificial intelligence all the time, whether it's things like podcasts, imagery, videos, games, and so on and so forth. The content industry is a $6 trillion industry that employs 235 million people. AI is coming from them, and I'm having that conversation with a couple of people tomorrow. Drugs. We saw in silico's artificial intelligence create 30,000 new drug candidates in 21 days. And 3 of those were alpha drug candidates that would normally take a decade or so to produce and cost billions of dollars. We've seen OpenAI create the world's most dexterous robot in the space of days. But it would have taken over 800 years of actual learning for that robot to do it in a traditional way. And this robot can do a Rubik's Cube one-handed in under a minute. That's how dexterous it is. And then rockets. We even have artificial intelligences that are now designing single-form rockets. So this is from Hyperganic. This is literally a single-piece rocket engine, and you 3D print it. A traditional rocket engine has about 10,000 parts and has to be manufactured using global supply chains and everything else. This upends everything. So finally, basically, when we start talking about futurist mindset, and I'm just touching the surface basically of the changes that we're seeing across different industries, there are a couple of things that we need to think about. So as a futurist, it's not just about the why and the how. So this triangle here, basically, we still need to find the problem to solve as entrepreneurs and businesses. What's the problem we're solving? Do people care about us solving it? And will they pay money for us to solve it? If the answer is yes, go to the second stage. We then create a product. We then create products using a combination of different technologies. So I've already shown you what we've done with some of those technologies. So we have our product. Now, as investors, as business professionals, and as individuals, kind of what we really care about is the when will that new product that somebody has created have a significant impact on a particular market or industry, for better or worse. And when it comes to the when, if we have a look at things like Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, a $36 billion investment on his behalf, the metaverse is a slow burn megatrend. Because what we see from a cultural perspective is if I have the latest thing here, it typically takes society 10 to 20 years to adopt it. Self-driving cars, another good example, and so on and so forth. Energy, etc. But if that product is not accessible to me in my market, if it's not affordable, if it's not convenient, if my friends don't use it, if the regulators say no to that product, if the insurers won't insure that product, even if it's genetic re-engineering, then I can't use that product in my particular market. So you need lots of different factors to come together before we can say this product will start having an impact on this market in this timeline. If you have no visibility of these things that are actually happening, then there is no way you can have any opinion basically on those, what those things can do, the impact that they can have. So no visibility, no opinion. Small details matter. Now, as an investment organization, I would be confident enough to guarantee that you have positions in energy companies, ESG, renewable energy, etc., etc., etc. Small details matter. If you've never heard of black silicon, Today's solar panels, silicon solar panels, are 17 to 20% energy efficient. Put bacteria into those solar panels, they are 50% energy efficient. You reclaim heat from solar panels using carbon nanotubes, those solar panels become 80% energy efficient. If you use black silicon, those solar panels, and this is a 3D printed nanomaterial, become 132% energy efficient because we've built them. Now what this means is you suddenly have solar panels that work using ambient light, work at night. Now for those of you in the energy sector, me saying solar panels that work at night and generate electricity at night should be setting off an alarm bell. Because black silicon, as well as other photovoltaic materials, mean that we no longer need or will no longer need grid scale storage to the same level that we need it today. Bearing in mind there are huge amounts of investment going into grid scale storage. So small details matter when we talk about the future of individual sectors, products, and so on and so forth. The world is generally not random because we all want things to be more convenient. We all care about the economics of how we go to market, but how we build and produce and scale product development. But we also care about emotions. I don't want to get in your self-driving car because I just don't. I just don't trust it. So the world is actually, despite all of this, mostly not random. And then finally, you've got to remember that today's stupid is just tomorrow's business as usual. So I hope you enjoyed that little jaunt through the present day, which is why when we talk about the sci-fi-less future, everything that you think of as sci-fi, whether it is holograms, tractor beams, whether it's lightsabers, whether it is mind reading and so on and so forth, we've already done it. I can show you the video. There is no sci-fi. There is just the future. So thank you very much for listening. And I think we've got some questions and answers now. So take care.